the first step of any conflict is to internalize and self-reflect. What am I bringing to this situation? Why am I having the emotional response I am, and what am I going to do with it? Do I really understand what's going on here? I know that seems very basic. The example I like to use here is the toothpaste cap. The couple is arguing about the toothpaste tube. One partner comes in and finds it's not on again in the morning. He's like, that's it, I'm done. We're getting a divorce. This stupid toothpaste thing has gone on too long. The situation isn't about the toothpaste. The toothpaste is the straw that broke the camel's back, but there's obviously other things in that situation that should have been discussed beforehand before it got to the point where the toothpaste ended the marriage.
Do you avoid conflict? Are you afraid of it even in a workplace environment? If you're human, the chances are you answered yes to one or both of those questions. And the science of effective, productive, safe and successful conflict resolution is one of those things that nearly all leaders struggle with. And it's a challenge the new manager is likely to face sooner or later in their career, but most likely sooner. So helpfully, my guest today is Kat Newport, who is an experienced corporate and non-profit leader turned conflict resolution enthusiast. Kat brings some great stories and decades of expertise to the show today. She's also an accredited coach and change practitioner specializing in conflict management, leadership and organizational development. And Kat's work is dedicated to helping individuals, families and organizations to navigate conflict and change with creativity and that all-important growth mindset. So with over 30 years of experience in this field, she's going to have some excellent insights to share with us on the key topic, conflict resolution and leadership today.
Welcome to the Leading with Integrity podcast. Leadership talk for the modern manager. With your host, David Hatch.
Kat, welcome to Leading with Integrity. It is lovely to have you on the show. Lovely to meet you as well, because this is our first meeting. And really, just to kick us off, over to you. Tell the listeners a bit about yourself, your career, your background, what you get up to today and why you do it.
This could take the whole hour. I'm the founder of Oculus Inc. So this is my passion project. I took a year off work to go and dive into conflict management of all things. Most folks don't go that way. I'm a conflict educator, a mediator, and a conflict coach. So dealing with groups, dealing with individuals, and dealing with education on a broad scale. So that is where the passion lies. Where does that come from? I've spent 30 years in leadership in highly conflicting sort of roles, quality management, those kinds of things where, walking into folks' workplaces saying they might not be doing something right. No conflict there. It gradually became something that I really became passionate about. And when I got into organizational development, learning how to do conflict management was the most popular topic we had within the organization. So I figured, I think we've hit on something. So during my sabbatical, I ended up writing the book. So Smart Conflict is now out and about. You can get that on Amazon. And today, the day job, I work in human resources. Again, no conflict there. I work in human resources. So super conflict manager by night, mild-mannered human resource manager by day.
I'll take your word for that. Yeah.
Don't talk to my colleagues.
Yeah. Sounds right. Yeah. So, conflict is obviously a really interesting subject from a lot of angles. The HR angle is pretty self-explanatory, hopefully. And I think it's interesting to hear how frequently it came up, though, in your experiences. I think it's obviously something that any leader needs to be able to, but nobody really wants to be good at it. Do you know what I mean? Nobody wants to say I'm great at conflict because that feels bad somehow. But at the same time, it's a pretty important skill set, isn't it?
Absolutely. I think managing conflict the right way is one of the most important skills you can have for building relationships. Managing conflict in a healthy and positive way is an investment in a relationship. You're actually putting forth effort. You're actually putting forth care on the perspectives of other folks, as opposed to mismanaging or having unhealthy conflict, which can lead to relationship breakdown. And when you're looking at that from a leadership perspective, I mean, leadership is all about relationships. What relationships can you forge? How healthy are they? Are you moving towards the organizational goals and your personal career goals? So if you look at conflict as a positive source for investment, as opposed to whatever narrative you've carried through your life, and there's so many, whatever, heavy narrative that you've carried through, if you can flip that narrative, you can flip that script, it becomes a more positive thing, and it definitely becomes something that you do want to put forth as a leader.
I love that reframe, actually, and viewing it in a positive way and an important skill set. You've hinted at an answer to this question, I think, but I'd love to know if there's some specific experience or some event, maybe. I don't want to pry, but I mean, what was it that first really inspired you to get into this subject of conflict resolution? Or was it just kind of a build up, if you like, of experiences over time?
I entered the workforce at the age of 19. So here I am.
Oh, so that was the whole answer, right?
Period. I love 19-year-olds. I have a couple in my house, I love those. But yeah, conflict's not the skill. Entered the workforce at 19 and went almost immediately into a leadership role. So I found that at that point, my conflict management skills were terrible. Terrible is a good word. Terrible is a nice descriptor. So it became one of those things throughout my career that I kept revisiting and had to revisit and had to work on and had to educate myself on and had to get mentorship on. So while conflict management has had some negative impacts on my career, it's also had some positive impacts on my career, but it is something I had to basically teach myself and source myself throughout my career. So that's always been a gap. So it's been, like I said, it became that passion project for me too. If I struggled this much, I'm sure there's other folks who struggle too. Maybe I can be a helping hand along the way.
Yeah, you kind of described there how I feel about leadership as well, actually. Sometimes people just assume you can do it, and it's just a natural talent that you either have or you don't. When actually, I think the same is probably true with conflict management, isn't it? It is a learned skill. You can't just, I'm sure there are some people out there who are just better at being diplomatic or whatever. But there are, same as leadership. I think there's key steps you can learn. There's things you can do. There's things you shouldn't do or can avoid doing. And it's, again, I think similar to leadership. It's a lot of businesses, a lot of organizations don't really teach these skills, or at least not until it's too late. Something's already gone wrong.
Very much so. I find that historically, and it's slowly changing, getting a little bit more evolved, but historically it was very much, you are technically good at what you do. You have the technical skills. We're going to put you in charge of a team. Being in charge of a team and being technically good at what you do are two totally different skill sets. As I said, I believe leadership is all about relationships. If you struggle with relationship management, if you struggle with communication, if you struggle with conflict management, if you struggle with boundary setting, leadership is going to be very, very challenging. And again, coming from a background of human resources, I've seen how it can go very, very wrong. I've also seen how it can go very, very right, but I have seen how it can go very, very wrong.
I have to ask the question now. Whenever I get someone on the show who has an HR background, and this is one of their fault way early in the show when I interviewed one, who encouraged me to ask this question: what's your craziest experience in HR? Like, what's the story that sticks out as I can't believe that happened? Putting you on the spot, I know. But.
So I actually go over this one in the book. So I'll bring this one forward. It's more along the lines of conflict management versus leadership, but I think it was at that pivotal moment where it became glaringly evident that I needed an upgrade in my skill set. I was working with a union relationship, and I had an individual come in who had attacked a colleague, like physically attacked a colleague. So from a human, so from a human resource perspective, I had this on CCTV. The individual was hospitalized. It was not a light tap on the shoulder at a way to go, buddy. This was quite violent. So had this individual and the union representative come into my office, and I started it out, hey, how are you? There's been an incident, and it was, what incident? I don't know what you're talking about. I'm like, okay, I've seen the video. I don't know how you can forget this. But didn't you have a problem with this individual? It's like, no, I don't even know who you're talking about. And, it was one of those things where that line of inquiry just was not getting it. So I got really frustrated, and I just flipped my computer around and I hit play. Next thing I know, I got a fist coming out of nowhere. So thank heavens for the cat-like reflexes of the union representative. Otherwise, I would have been picking up my teeth that day.
Crikey.
I know I missed nonverbal cues. I know I missed tone of voice. I know I missed body language. 2020 hindsight, looking at it going, yeah, maybe I shouldn't push like that. But that was kind of that moment where, okay, we need to figure this out. We being the royal we and myself. I need to figure this out, right?
Well, I mean, that's a pretty extreme example. I have to give you the points there, definitely. Yeah, wow. And so easily done as well, because I mean, most of us are never going to assume that that'll be someone's first response, aren't we?
I had video evidence that it might be.
Well, yeah, I mean, but even then, the natural assumption is there was something going on between those two people, and it wasn't just out of the blue, right? But,
it's true.
Yeah.
True.
Wow. I mean, I thought I was going to go on a totally different route when you started that story. I was expecting something like he'd had legal advice and was told to admit nothing, and that was all it was. But, wow.
Yeah, I have those stories too, but this one's a little bit more impactful. It's got that good behind it. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll give you that, definitely. Yeah, well, thank you for sharing, and I'm glad you were able to walk away with all your teeth, let's say.
I'm very happy to have retained them myself, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Dear me. Well, okay. But I mean, based on your experience, I mean, obviously there's a great example there. What are some of the most common challenges or things that people struggle with when they are navigating conflicts? Maybe not like that, but from the extreme to the day-to-day, the routine. And what can people do to address those?
Absolutely. So when we're looking at conflict, we always think about that flashpoint. And the main question I get when I'm teaching or coaching is, how do I make the other person do insert action or feeling here? The first step of any conflict is to internalize and self-reflect. What am I bringing to this situation? Why am I having the emotional response I am, and what am I going to do with it? Do I really understand what's going on here? I know that seems very basic. The example I like to use here is the toothpaste cap. The couple is arguing about the toothpaste tube. One partner comes in and finds it's not on again in the morning. It's like, that's it. I'm done. We're getting a divorce. This stupid toothpaste thing has gone on too long. The situation isn't about the toothpaste. The toothpaste is the straw that broke the camel's back, but there's obviously other things in that situation that should have been discussed beforehand before it got to the point where the toothpaste ended the marriage. So understanding what you're bringing in, understanding the situation, and understanding that conflict isn't about making your emotions go away or making your emotions feel better. So I think those are the three top ones that kind of come to mind for me.
Yeah, I like that. That's a good metaphor for it. I mean, I suppose the buzz phrase is the trigger, isn't it? I guess, and people being triggered by certain things. And I think there's so many times. I mean, I've been on both sides of that in conflicts in my past career, where just something that it seemed innocent in the moment. It was like just a day-to-day thing that one or other of us had probably said to each other 100 times, but for whatever reason that day, just that was it. It was the trigger or the straw that broke the camel's back, exactly as you say. So yeah, I mean, do you think it's possible to understand what each other's triggers are? I guess it depends how long you work together and how well you know these people, doesn't it?
Very much so. I'm a big believer in self first. A lot of folks, particularly when I see them in conflict coaching, have no idea what their triggers are. Sally makes me so angry. Well, why does Sally make you angry? What is it that Sally does that makes you angry? And you end up seeing these patterns come up, because it's not just Sally that makes me so angry. It's Sally and Johnny and Muhammad, and all of them make me so angry because they're all doing a very similar thing. So this isn't about them. This is about me. This is about what I'm bringing in. So really understanding that and standing in that, and understanding that this baggage you're bringing in is going to affect how you lead other people. Number 2 here, I'm thinking empathy. A lot of times we start ascribing the worst to other folks. Oh, David's out to get me. He's out to get me. That's it.
Who told you? Oh,
right? I knew it. When in fact it's quite innocent. David's not even thinking about me. David's thinking about how to get his project done. It has nothing to do with accounting. They just needed, X, Y, and Z done. So it's not about me, but I'm making it about me because of my internal narratives. So it's about understanding that the emotions are a signpost. Yes, there's something going on. Yes, you need to pay attention to it, but it's not up to the other person to make you feel better. It's up to you to figure out, okay, this is pointing me in a direction. What is it? Am I morally affronted? Is this a risk to me, to the organization, to our team, to the project? Why is this emotion coming up right now? And then really unpacking that before you approach. I've seen so many folks come in and just, drop it all on the colleague, and the colleague's sitting there going, what the heck just happened? And then having to mediate through that from an HR perspective, or having to mediate through that from a leadership perspective. I mean, that type of infighting, saps that productivity, saps the psychological safety in the workplace. It can be really tough.
Yeah, and it can be so damaging to the culture as well. And that's one of those things, I think, a lot of times anyway, particularly in the smaller companies, once that culture starts to erode, it's the top of a slippery slope, and it's almost impossible to get back up the slope, isn't it?
It will take a while. It will take a while.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, but I think, what I really like about both of those is it speaks to leadership as well. Again, I'm biased and I always tie everything to leadership because that's what I care about. So yeah. But the whole kind of the self-knowledge piece followed on from that into the self-awareness, so I know this about myself, and then what am I actually going to do about it next time so I don't repeat these unhelpful behaviors. And then obviously empathy. That is a huge buzzword in leadership in recent years, and for good reason. And what I think a lot of leaders get stuck in, a lot of managers, that whole, and I guess it's tied to that whole kind of data-driven decision principle, isn't it? About removing the emotion from situations and from your decision making. And I don't know if I agree with that, because humans are emotional beings, right? Like, you can't, however hard you try, ignoring the outliers of those extreme personalities, there's always going to be some level of emotion in that. So where I'm going with that is it's tying it back to what you're saying about understanding what your triggers are, the self-awareness, and still having that empathy, part of which has to be about recognizing and managing your own emotions as well.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I'm a Gen Xer. I started my career in the 90s. I freely admit it. I come from a generation that was taught you don't bring your emotions to work. And that is physically impossible. Everybody shows up as a whole human being when you walk into work. The emotions are always there. And I always giggle when I hear somebody say, well, emotions don't belong at work. I'm like, okay, that's your discomfort coming at me. Discomfort is emotion. And I always get a giggle out of it. Understanding that those emotions are going to be there. And yes, you're going to have to deal with them as a leader, not just your own, but that of your team and your colleagues is super important. So addressing those narratives, addressing those triggers, addressing what you think about emotions in the workplace, particularly now since we have 5 generations in the workplace. Everything from baby boomers right up to, my 3rd born child is now in the workforce. We've got this whole sort of gambit, this 50, 60-year range in age difference. And that's not a bad thing, but you have to take that person where they're at. You have to understand that this is a whole fully formed human being who has a set of experiences and lived culture, and they're bringing that uniqueness into the workplace, as opposed to, yeah, whatever, boomer. You've got to recognize that individual as opposed to pouring your bias into the workplace by adding a judgment or a label.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, the generational question is an interesting one that we've covered a few times. And I think a lot of people are interested in it because they're impacted by it almost every day. But I think it is easy to forget. I mean, speaking as a millennial, an oldish millennial, but still just a millennial, I kind of feel like I sit in the middle of both of those. I'm almost in the middle of those 5 generations, aren't I? Not quite, but almost. And I do feel like, I mean, the boomer one is particularly interesting because I think their generation, it was exactly as you say, it's like there's no room for emotion at work. We're all about the objective decision making. Ironically, in my experience, they rarely actually are, but that's a different question. But I think what's easy to forget, particularly those in the newer, younger generations, is that sort of assumption can go both ways, and it is very easy to just write it off as that old boy doesn't know what he's on about, or, that she was in the workforce, before I was born, what does she know about a modern business, and so on. And that's just as damaging, just as toxic, just as bad an assumption that needs to be gotten rid of. And I think there's a lot of, communication is key to it all. And I think having a little bit of grace for people who have had different experiences to you, who were in the workforce before COVID or before the credit crunch or, and so on. And vice versa, who joined afterwards and didn't go through what you went through. Doesn't mean anyone in that spectrum has a view that isn't valid or as valid as yours.
Absolutely. And I'm going to put a very unpopular perspective across the table here. Once you start categorizing people and slapping a label on them and then assuming that they're going to act like something just because who they are, you started bias. This is a bias. This is judgment in the workplace. This can devolve very quickly into harassment and discrimination. So as we look at the workplace, we have to be very, very careful of when we start flinging these things. We wouldn't fling racial slurs, so why are we flinging generational slurs?
That's an excellent point, yeah. No, I don't think that's controversial at all. If it is, it shouldn't be. And I think you're right to raise that and bang that drum, definitely. I don't know. I think thinking back to a few times in the workplace where I've either seen it or been involved in it, I won't say too much, but I don't really think that it was put in terms of categorizing generations. Maybe that's just because it wasn't as popular to think of people that way back then, but there was definitely an age narrative or a youth narrative, if that makes sense. And you're right. It does lead you into assigning motives that aren't necessarily true, to making assumptions someone's going to think a certain way because of their age or their youth or both, and yeah, it's not right. There's another one totally different to the age argument, but I think diversity as a whole, there's a couple of areas that I think are maybe not talked about enough, which is the diversity of thought, which I guess is it's the result of everything else, isn't it, to a point, but also the economic diversity, which isn't really talked about either. And again, it's like someone's background doesn't necessarily influence what they might think about an issue, but if you assume it does, you're the bad guy then, I suppose.
You could be.
Yeah.
What I like to use here as an image, as a metaphor, is as leaders, we always tell people to think outside the box. We've been told to think outside the box. But if the only perspective you're listening to is your own and the ones that are just like you, you're not thinking outside the box. You've firmly slammed the lid on the box and you're not getting out. So this is where diversity of thought, diversity of background, be it economic, be it cultural, be it experiential, this then becomes important. And this is where conflict arises. conflict is not a bad thing. Conflict is not a yelling match. Conflict is the point where two divergent perspectives meet. That's it. That's all it is where two divergent perspectives meet. And it's what you do with that meeting point that makes it healthy or unhealthy conflict. And when we're looking at the relationship and we're looking at that empathetic point and we're looking at you are a fully formed, completely whole human being, as am I, what are we going to do with this difference of perspective? Are we going to fight it out, duke it out to find out who wins? And for those of you who are listening, those were air quotes. For those of you watching, you got it. Finding out who wins. If you're going into a conflict with this dominating aggressor personality of I'm going to win at all costs, you've already lost. You've already lost.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that as well. It's reminded me of a conversation I had. Can't remember how long ago it was now. I have so many of these conversations, I lose track. But anyway, it was all about how to disagree, but respectfully, which is kind of a tangent to conflict, but it's very relevant. And I think there is this whole, it's easy to blame social media, so I will. It's social media's fault. This whole kind of divisive nature, isn't there, in society generally? I mean, not just politics or the workplace even, but this kind of mentality of, if someone doesn't have the same point of view as me, or if they disagree with me, or we're in a conflict for whatever reason, I'm right. I don't want to hear any other alternatives, and the other person is bad because they're wrong for disagreeing with me. And you just end up in these broken relationships, whether that's with a colleague or a family member or a friend or whatever. And it does feel like the ability to have a positive debate even, and a conflict that doesn't result in hating each other. It feels like it's a dying art almost. Maybe I'm getting a bit, I don't know, emotional about it, but what do you think?
I respect your opinion and see where you're coming from. And see where you're coming from with social media. Just pulling that scope back a little bit. I think that's always been there in humanity. If we look at South African apartheid, if we look at race relations in the United States, if we look at the extermination of indigenous people on, most of the continents on this planet, this divisiveness, religion, gun control, this has always been there. I don't like you because you don't look like me, think like me, act like me, talk like me. It's always been there. And social media has made it more insidious. It's easier to do it because now you don't have to show up and face the other person. You can do it from halfway across the planet. So I wouldn't say social media is a new way to do it or a new evolution, but I think it is a new tool to do what we've always done as a species.
No, that's a fair point, actually. And I mean, even in the life of the internet before social media, you're right. It was still a thing then, and it was very easy to be the keyboard warrior, wasn't it? Yeah, good point. Good point. I'm fair on social media. I retract.
I appreciate you listening to me. Thank you.
Yeah, I don't know. I guess there's that phenomena, isn't there? Like the older you get, the more you've kind of wished things were the way they were. But I do feel like even 20 years ago, it wasn't as difficult to have like a critical thought or critical conversation or a bit of conflict, a bit of disagreement compared to how it is now. And maybe it's not so much about social media. Maybe it's more politics of the day. But then counterpoint to myself, I was talking to someone else about this months ago. He was an American gentleman. He reminded me very much. He's like, well, a lot of people say that about some of the wars that have happened in the last 10, 15 years and how divisive those were and how much of an internal conflict that caused. And I just remind them about what it was like for soldiers coming home from Vietnam. There's a very good point. He's like, these aren't new phenomena. And exactly as you've said, just a different example, really. Very
much. And from a Canadian perspective on Vietnam, a lot of folks fled north, and harbored themselves here. So it's a very complex web of what we accept as right and what we're willing to do in the face of challenge, in the face of things we disagree with.
Well, there we go. I don't know if there's hope in there or not. I'm gonna say there is. Yeah.
There's always hope.
The more things change, the more they stay the same. I don't know. There's some other cliche that maybe fits better, but
So we start going through our book of cliches now. Is that...
Oh, no, I've left it in the other room. Lucky listeners, you don't have to deal with that now.
Oh, good.
We've talked about empathy a little bit. I think there's also a couple of other words. I mean, leadership is one of them, but assertiveness, I think, is quite an interesting word as well, where when it comes to getting these positive outcomes from conflict and doing it in the right way, a lot of people would see assertiveness as being a negative, perhaps, because it conjures words like pushy and bad listener and things like that. But actually, there is a role for it alongside empathy, alongside leadership in these kinds of conflicts. So, yeah, I mean, how do you see the role of these differing behaviors in contributing to those positive outcomes?
Assertiveness is absolutely vital to conflict management. But assertiveness comes from a deep understanding of where your boundaries are. So I know what I will negotiate on, and I know what I will not negotiate on. And when folks talk to me about assertiveness, it's usually focused on the stuff that the other person won't negotiate on, which makes them pushy and awful and terrible. We also, since we've been talking a little bit about bias, make sure that we're attaching that to this as well. If a man stands up for himself, it's very different than a woman who stands up for herself. He's taking care of business and she's just a witch. So we do have to watch that bias because that threads in as well. So all these topics we're talking about are more of a conglomerate, and they don't stand alone. I also really want to pull out here just the thread that assertiveness is not the same as aggressiveness. They are two different things. And this is an internal interpretation as well. So if someone is assertive and you're saying, well, they're terribly aggressive and they yelled at me when they didn't raise their voice, they just were very definitive, that's something you have to unpack. Where is that coming from? Why are you seeing assertiveness as aggressiveness? Your boss saying, no, I'm not going to give you your vacation is them being aggressive and not liking you, and, really understanding the narratives you're attaching to things. So this goes all the way back to those boundaries. What are they? What is your personal mission, vision, values? Where is your moral compass pushing you to make those boundaries? And what are you willing to accept? And a lot of us have never really thought about boundaries. It's like, oh, I feel really terrible and this person keeps pushing my buttons. Well, it's time to put up a boundary, my friend. A nice living hedge where you can protect your buttons, but still have a relationship. So I think those are all very intrinsically entwined.
Yeah, it's so interesting, isn't it? Particularly with that question of boundaries. You don't often realize where they should have been until you've gone so far past them.
Yep, until you've been tweeted.
It feels like it's one of those things that you can only know should be there in hindsight, doesn't it? And then for the next time, I suppose. Yeah, it is interesting. I mean, the assertiveness and aggressive, I know exactly what you mean. They're points on a scale, don't they? With like aggressive being right at the end of the scale and assertive maybe 1 or 2 points from the bottom, but the healthy place to be. Totally irrelevant, but it reminds me of that definition of arrogance as well. Like, it's only arrogant if it's not true. Like, if it's true, then it's confidence. But
there's a way of delivering it and preserving
true, yeah. Yeah, so again, there's a couple of points on the scale there, aren't there? But it's interesting, like the meaning we assign to words and how that changes based on the individual, their understanding of it, the way they were taught what that means, but also the experiences they've been through and some of the people they may have encountered during that time as well.
Precisely. You're dead on the money.
So what would be your top 3? You can have more than 3 if you like, but 3 felt like a nice number to choose. So your top 3 tips to any leader out there in the audience who is currently struggling to resolve a conflict at work.
Top 3 tips. Number 1, understand the situation you're in. Do a root cause analysis. It's not about the toothpaste. So that would be tip number 1. Tip number 2, Recognize your emotions as signposts and not something to act on so the other person makes you feel better. Emotions are yours to manage. Emotions are yours to own. And third, take a look at conflict and couple it with curiosity. Instead of reacting in a defensive way, instead of reacting in an assertive way, react with curiosity. Why do you think that way? How do you see a way forward? I see frustration. How can your frustration be eased? If you take conflict and add curiosity, you now have healthy conflict because you're inserting empathy into the situation.
Yeah, I love curiosity just as a leadership tool generally. But yeah, I can definitely see it in most conflicts. I think there's always going to be the ones that have gone too far, and like the questioning is going to be like the red flag to the bull. But assuming you haven't let it get that far, right?
Yes. Just going to hit pause here for a moment. The human brain is hardwired to remember the bad things. It's a survival mechanism. It's been there since the beginning of time. It's ensured the survival of our species. This is how our brain works. I can pretty much guarantee that you're in conflict every single day. You just don't notice it because it's not threatening. The person serving you coffee has made a mistake on your order. You're in conflict. You want your right order, but you never ever think of it again because it's not a major risk. So what we end up having here is a negativity bias. We're looking at this going, oh, no, remember that one time I nearly got clocked in the head by the union guy? These are the ones we remember and hold. So we do end up with this negativity bias. So I do want to place a caution cone on the road here. That if we're constantly looking at, well, conflict's always bad, conflict's always bad, conflict's always bad, slow down a minute. And when you look at that definition of conflict, that it's a meeting of different perspectives, I think you handle it better than you think you do.
Yes, I think that's fair. Yeah. I don't want to get into sweeping generalizations, but I do think, I mean, conflict as a general, I agree. It's, it's not always bad. I think if it's with the same caveats as you've already given us, if it's handled the right way, if it's managed properly, if particularly from the leadership perspective, if you're going into it with that right mindset and right way of looking at it, actually it's a positive. And it's the same as kind of disagreements, isn't it? Being maybe a lesser form of a conflict. You want disagreement in your team because if everyone agrees with you, again, it's back to what we're talking about with diversity, isn't it? Like if everyone in the room is the same, thinks the same, says the same, does the same, what's the point of them? Like you only need one of them, don't you, at that point? Which is harsh, but you want different views. Otherwise, you can't guarantee good decision making because you're not considering all of those different options.
Very much so. And as you were talking, what it was starting to bring to mind here is the feelings of fear and excitement. If you actually stop and think about it, the feeling of fear and the feeling of excitement feels very similar in your body. It has a similar chemical release in your body, the elevated heart rate, the flushed cheeks. You can get the shakes from it, that you're all excited and it's going to go. It's how you interpret what's going to happen next, whether it makes you fearful or whether it makes you excited. So walking into a conflict, you're shaking, your heart's racing, your breathing is shallow. Are you scared or are you excited? What do you choose to be? Because it is a choice.
Oh, words of wisdom there, definitely. I like that. But thank you for that. Some really useful advice, I think, for anyone who's struggling with conflict. I mean, I said leaders or managers, but it could just be in any part of your life, really, couldn't it, to be fair?
Very much so. Very much so.
So leadership then. What would you say is the biggest leadership lesson that you've learned in your career so far?
Relationships are fundamental. Period. End of sentence. Drop the mic. If you're not building the right relationships, your leadership journey is going to be terribly difficult.
100%. And I think valuing the relationships as well. Valuing the people, really. I mean, if I was asked that question, that would be very much my answer as well. It is all about the people because it's all about the relationships, isn't it? What was the best experience you've ever had of being led and what made it the best?
The The best instance of being led, we were in the middle of a major transformation project. And whenever there's change, there's resistance. In this particular instance, there was a lot. Everybody was a little resistant, some more than others, bringing us to the point of frustration, bringing team, we lost multiple team members, it was just, we're done. There's no way we can move forward when the waves coming onto the shore are so strong. What made the leader in this instance particularly useful is once they became aware of the issue, they took time with each of us on the change team to validate our experiences, to understand where we were coming from, to hear the story. So not only was it, yes, I'm gathering the facts to figure out how to move our change forward, it was, I want to hear your frustration. I want to validate your frustration. I want to give you a vent so that we can go back into this and look at it objectively. So not only was there, these are the facts, and they then went with them to help stem the tide. He gave each one of us on the team that opportunity to release, to, yes, I see this is frustrating. Yes, I see you. And we were not just automatons trying to push something through.
Yeah, it's so important. I mean, that word validation, I mean, thinking back again to what we were talking about earlier with particularly the generational differences. And I don't want to make it about generations or age. So I'm going to say it's about the traditional approaches to leadership, which is not confined to a particular generation, I have to say. There's quite a lot of new leaders doing that as well. But I think what that type of leadership so often misses or forgets or doesn't think is important, they're even dismissive of it, aren't they? And it's, again, it links to this conversation about no emotion in the workplace as well, I think. Is just they don't do that. They don't go through that exercise. And the change management is a great example of when you have to do that, in my opinion. But it's not confined to that either. It's at any point in when you're leading people, you've got to be willing, you've got to set aside time and give importance to hearing them out on things, validating their opinions, thanking them for sharing their thoughts and their worries even. Because it isn't that easy to do for a lot of people to kind of open up to your manager in that way. It is, a lot of people still feel that is quite a big risk, and you might be, putting your job at risk even in some situations. So I do really think it's important for leaders to be willing and able to do that.
Absolutely. And this does require a certain level of psychological safety, to your point.
Absolutely.
I was comfortable enough, the team was comfortable enough to go to this individual.
Mm-hmm.
Secondary to your point, this leader was actually a Gen X. So, when you're thinking, oh, this must have been a millennial leader or one of the younger leaders because a little more sensitized. Nope. Broke the mold.
No, I wasn't making that assumption at all, actually.
Sorry. Just putting it out there. And thirdly, the comment I want to make here is, as a leader, you have to become comfortable with discomfort. It's not comfortable sitting in someone else's emotions. It's very uncomfortable to sit in your own emotions, let alone someone else's. But as a leader, you've got to get used to that discomfort, that it's not about you. It's not a risk to you. We're sitting in this discomfort so we can process it and move on. Because this is about momentum. This is about building resilience. And that's what we're trying to do as leaders, is keep us moving forward, to keep the teams bouncing back quickly, keep them bouncing back hard, and make sure that when they become leaders themselves, that they're doing the same thing, that they're able to adjust to those moments.
Yeah, that last one is super important as well. Just for the longevity of your organization as well, really, because, otherwise you're just in this self-fulfilling cycle, aren't you? Try not to be unkind to someone I used to work for, but, I do recall these conversations about, in exactly that sort of situation, there's a change management. Some of us, myself included, were getting quite emotional, a little bit irate about it all. And just the number of times I had the same comment come back of, I wish we could just remove the emotion from this. It's not helpful. And it's like, okay, but you're not hearing what we're saying. And it's exactly that. Like, that's the textbook wrong way of handling that situation.
Absolutely. The emotion is telling you something is wrong. Mm-hmm. Something's not quite right.
Definitely. Okay. So tell us then, what your best piece of advice would be for a brand new manager, their first week on the job, let's say. What's the first thing they should do, and what's the last thing they should ever do?
First thing, start making those relationships right out of the gate. Figure out who's who in the zoo and start building the relationships. I could say it over and over, but it would come out exactly the same. Those relationships are the biggest piece. The last thing you want to do is come out of the gate so hard that you burn yourself out. So be aware of what you're doing, how much you're promising, what you're getting involved with. Pace yourself. Focus on the relationships. Focus on that holistic building. Keep moving towards deliverables, but deliverables are not the end all and be all.
Yeah, I think that's good advice. Something else that, especially sort of the earlier career leaders, let's call them, maybe overlook or don't think about until much later, is the relationships outside of your immediate team. Because, I mean, it's obvious you've got to have a relationship with the people you're leading. At least I hope it is. Maybe it's not. Maybe that's a bias. But I think, again, you know, what a lot of people could benefit from that they're maybe not doing is building that sort of that wider network within. I mean, if you're in a big company, great. You know, they've got all those people you can go and get to know. If not, you know, seek out other managers in other organizations or in your local town or go to a networking thing, you know, whatever, but have that kind of support network, if you like, that you can talk to about work or leadership challenges without that kind of, is angst the right word? Pressure, stress potentially, if feeling like you can only talk to people at work about work, if that makes sense.
Very much so. The wider you cast your net for networking or relationships, the more diverse opinions you're going to get, the more diverse perspectives you're going to get on the issues that you're having. It also guards against the potentiality, and I'm not saying anybody's doing this, but the potentiality of gossip. There's a difference between gossip and venting. Gossip, you're spreading rumors to somebody who's invested in the relationship, hence a coworker, and we're talking about our boss. That would be gossip. But if you're going to someone outside of work who has a leadership perspective, and you're saying, this is what I'm dealing with, what should I do, how do I move forward with it? This is venting, and this is terribly healthy. This is what helps keep the workplace free of that gossip, free of that angst. So it's super important to have a wider network. Absolutely.
That's a very good definition of the difference between gossip and venting as well, I have to say. Yeah. Trying to think back to whether I've actually honoured that difference in the past. Probably not. Yeah. Definitely a mistake I made of not having a wider network.
We've all stumbled there.
Yeah. But no, I agree with you. I mean, sometimes you've just got to get stuff off your chest, haven't you? And it's like that other cliche, isn't it? If you bottle it up, eventually the bottle's going to explode. So you might as well not do that.
Yeah, yeah. You don't want to have a heart attack at work.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, we're just like the veins in your temple just burst one day. Yeah, it's not healthy.
Agreed. Very dramatic, but agreed.
Well, you know, yeah, why not? Right, I've got a time travel question for you now. I do like these questions, I have to say. It's always get some really interesting answers. If you could start your career over again, what would you do differently?
I started my career and continue my career in a heavily male-dominated industry. So in the beginning of my career, I was very, very young. I crushed a lot of that femininity. I crushed a lot of that female style thinking, and I'm being very general here, that female style thinking to fit in. I mean, when I came on board, I was reporting to mostly baby boomer aged individuals. So there was a, swear like a sailor, drink like a man, and never let them see you cry, kind of mentality to it. And sitting here looking back on my career, looking back over 30 years going, that empathetic touch, that understanding of emotion, that ability to prioritize relationships in the workplace was not a bad thing. It was not a handicap. Looking back, if I had put that to use in certain situations, I think I would have been much better off. So here I am, in year 30 going, nope, I'm going to bring that back. I'm good. I'm bringing that back. But, going through those 30 years being hard and crunchy and very in my male energy versus having that hybrid, having that balance. I think that's one thing I would change.
Okay, fair enough. I mean, it's funny, isn't it? And I do wonder sometimes whether even the nature of this debate is a little bit sexist, but a lot of those skills that you're mentioning that we've talked about today, even, you know, the things like the empathy, and in inverted commas, the sort of the softer side of leadership, not really a thing when I entered the workplace, probably not when you did either. But today, I mean, especially after everything's happened the last sort of decade or so in all of our various countries, I think, like politically, economically, COVID, Great Resignation, you know, the list goes on, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Those skills now, I think, are essential to leadership. Like, if you're not doing those, you're not really an effective leader anymore. But the debate about them, it's still so often put in terms of, you know, the more traditionally feminine or the things that women are better at, and that's why they should be better leaders today, and all of this. I don't know. I mean, is that sexist, the way that debate is framed?
Very much so. Yeah, I can see how you're coming at it that way. Understanding that when we look at business, it's a patriarchal structure. And always has been. So it was inherently divisive right from the very beginning. Women don't work. They stay at home and take care of the children. Men run the business. The men are in the factory. We're going to build our education system to build good little factory workers. Girls don't have to go as long as boys do. Boys will go a little bit longer because they might become supervisors in the factory. I mean, it is a very patriarchal structure, and we still labor under it today. I mean, look around at world leaders. Count the women. I'm sure you could. You know, these are very
yeah.
I wasn't going to go that far, but you know, it's inherent into our existence at this point. There is a binary, there is male, there is female. Hence, we have the 2S LGBTQ plus movement. You know, there is more than this end of the scale or that end of the scale. There's so much in between. So yeah, we could be here a few hours discussing this one, but you're right. It is inherently biased. It's inherently sexist. It's inherently patriarchal.
I mean, I know there's a lot of my contemporaries even today who really fight against that message and almost see it as insulting to them. But I also think, like, there's definitely that patriarchal aspect. And I think that's, you know, part of a symptom of the history behind it all. We talk about it in terms of, say, the Industrial Revolution and the factory worker. I mean, how many factory workers are there even left in the world now with robotics in the state that it is? Like, the whole workplace, the way we produce, what we produce, the service focus now as well, none of it works the way it did even 40 years ago, 30 years ago. So why is it that we've still got these kind of, the baseline of how we operate these organizations is still from 1950s or earlier, 1800s even, potentially. It doesn't make sense to me. And leadership is a small part of that, but it's definitely true for leadership as well.
Absolutely. We're talking about changing culture now. We are talking about changing patriarchal cultures. Because when we take a look at this, we're looking at this from English, Australian, Canadian, American. I mean, these are all patriarchal systems that were founded because of monarchy. I mean, you want a patriarchal system. There you go. Sorry. You know what I mean? It's inherent. We're talking about trying to fundamentally change the way we think. And this goes back to that diversity, that bringing that different perspective. Someone who is traditionally doing childcare, bringing them into the work. What does that look like? Someone who is not necessarily from the dominant culture, bringing them into the workplace. What does that look like? Bringing someone from, indigenous nations into the workplace. What does that look like now? You know, and getting those perspectives. So yes, we're in the dichotomy of the male versus female, the patriarchy, the matriarchy, but this also is a wider conversation about backgrounds, socioeconomic, cultural, and all of those things. So we could be here.
We could. I was going to say, and sadly, we probably haven't got time to go into it, have we? But yeah, I mean, there are past episodes where we've talked about this. So if any of the listeners want to get into it, I'm sure they can, and maybe we can have another conversation about it in the future.
Absolutely.
I definitely agree. You know, it's one of those things where, like, in an ideal world, none of that should matter to the workplace. All that should matter is, can the person produce the output required? I don't even care how long they take or anything like that. I mean, again, that's a whole other issue and another can of worms to open, isn't it? But if that person, whatever they look like, whatever they sound like, you know, whatever, like, if they can deliver, that's all I, as a business owner or as a leader, should really care about in terms of what they are delivering to me. what I'm delivering to them is, again, something we've been talking about for nearly an hour, so I think we've covered that. But yeah, I don't know. It's maybe that's idealistic. Maybe it's too simplistic. I don't know, but we're probably not going to solve it today.
Probably not. The only thing that kind of comes to mind for me here is this starts on the personal. This starts with how you as an individual are showing up in your workplace. In the last 3 weeks, I've been mocked for what I've worn at work, from a male to a female. This still exists. Should it? No, it shouldn't. But again, it talks about what you stand for. We know what the other person stands for. There's a power and control using tradition. That's it. So my challenge to the individual is, what is your mission, vision, values? And how do you live that as an individual in the workplace? And how do you live that as a leader?
What is it that's important to you at the end of the day? Like, what are your priorities and what aren't? Like, telling me to tuck my shirt in or telling me off for wearing a t-shirt instead of one with a collar. Like, is that really what's important today? Or is it how well I've done the work?
And how you've made people feel and how you've developed other people and what your investment was. Because we may very well say, yes, I stand for equality, but then we talk the talk, but we don't walk the walk. So it's about putting the actions together with your philosophy.
Definitely. Well, and that's what leadership's all about in my book. So there we go. Excellent. Well, that feels like a good moment to move on to my last and favorite question.
All right.
Which is called Leadership Heroes.
Leadership Heroes.
So if you had to pick one person, and it could be anyone you like, past, present, alive, dead, from all of human history you could choose from if you like, or even from fiction, if that's more your speed. This person should, in your opinion, perfectly embody leadership. So who would that person be? And why?
At the risk of putting more pressure on this individual, because they still live, I would pick Jacinda Ardern, former Prime Minister of New Zealand, came into power like 3 weeks before the elections, handled COVID in a firm but fair way that was focused on individuals, guiding the country through COVID, ran unopposed. The first time, resounding majority. The second time, for her stance on community, for her stance on children, still managed to have a life, a partner, a child, took decisive action in the Christchurch attack, as opposed to waffling, became very concerned with, this is the new rule, and it's to save the people. It is to focus on the people. So that to me embodies empathetic leadership. I will do what I have to do. I will close the borders. I will shut everything down. We're going to be stuck in our homes. I will do what I have to do, and I will do it quickly, but I'm doing it for the right reasons. I'm going to ban automatic rifles. It's going to happen, and it's going to happen now, but it's for the right reasons. So I think that Jacinda Ardern.
It's a good choice. We have had her before, but only once or twice, I think. So quite a rare choice. But yeah, I mean, I really like. In fact, I use her example in some of the workshops I run because, I mean, it's quite rare, I think, to find, particularly in a national political leader, that mix of compassion and focus on the individuals and the people and decisiveness and the ability to make, we could argue whether it's right or wrong decisions, but make a decision at least, quickly and then follow through on it. And I think that the other example I use from her is actually her resignation speech when she left. That we talked about self-awareness earlier, didn't we? And self-knowledge. And she just basically said, look, I haven't got enough left in the tank. I can't do this job in the way that it deserves to be done anymore. I need to step down. Mm-hmm. And I mean, fair enough. Again, how rare is that in national political leaders who say things like that in this day and age? So nothing but respect for her, definitely.
Precisely.
Great choice. Well, Kat, it's been lovely talking to you. We've covered so many different aspects, haven't we, of conflict and leadership and where they cross over. One more thing I will ask you just quickly is if any of the listeners would like to learn more about you, perhaps get a copy of that book from somewhere, where can they go to do so?
The easiest place to find all the information is my website, which is www.smartconflictbook.com.
Lovely. And I'll pop all of that in the show notes. And you did give me a link earlier as well, which I'll put in there as well.
Marvelous.
Well, that's it. Thank you again so much. Have a great rest of your day. And yeah, thanks for being up so early to be with us.
Thanks so much for having me, David. I appreciate it.
Thank you to Kat for sharing some extremely relevant and useful stories today from her experiences in the HR field and more recently from her own expertise in leadership development and, of course, conflict resolution. We had examples there from how to keep your teeth in a more aggressive kind of argument, all the way through to how to see through your own misconceptions in the more average and usually innocent kind of office misunderstanding that hopefully is more likely for the majority of us. But either way, there's some really helpful and practical advice today too. So yes, thank you, Kat, for that and for your time today. Listener or viewer, if you would like to learn more about Kat and the work that she does, if you're looking for some help with conflict, then please do visit the links that you will find in the episode notes today. And to all of you new managers and first-time leaders in the audience, if you would like to improve your own leadership potential, do come and join us at Integrity Leaders, where you will find a community, learning, leadership resources, and access one-to-one support from me. So to do that, pay a visit today to www.leadernotaboss.com. Click on the green button on that page and sign up today. Integrity Leaders is built specifically for new leaders, first-time founders, and learner managers just like you. Now, unfortunately, the 60-day free trial offer that I have been running is over now. However, I am pleased to announce instead a new podcast listener exclusive offer. If you join now, you can use the promo code HALFOFF24. That's all caps and then the numbers 2 and 4. And that will give you a 50% discount on your monthly membership fee. And that's permanent. Every month, half price for as long as you remain a member. That's a pretty great offer, if I do say so myself. But if you're not sure or you want more details or you'd like to have a chat before you join, as always, please do feel free to message me on LinkedIn for more details. And again, that link is in the show notes below. So thanks again for being with us today. I hope you'll be back again next week when we'll be changing gear from conflict and talking about comedy, storytelling, and the role of humour in leadership with Connor Caneen, the speaker who delivers business ideas with a smile. Connor is a lot of fun, and so is that conversation. You don't want to miss that next week. So until then, have healthier conflicts and be a leader, not a boss.